President Trump has ordered the US Navy to open fire on any Iranian forces which, quote, harass its boats as tension increases in the Gulf.
At 1:47 p.m. in the sweltering heat of the Persian Gulf, a routine patrol suddenly turned into one of the most dramatic naval confrontations in recent memory. A small U.S. Navy patrol ship, far from shore and seemingly outmatched, found itself the target of an aggressive boarding attempt by 8 fast attack boats from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Iranian boats closed at high speed, ignored international maritime norms, and attempted to seize control of an American vessel in international waters. A blatant provocation that could have sparked a wider conflict. In that split second when danger loomed largest, with the odds stacked against the Americans in sheer numbers, it would have been easy to assume this was a simple case of overreach by a reckless adversary. Instead, as events would soon prove, Tehran had walked straight into a meticulously prepared U.S. response that turned the tables in the most decisive way. Within just 52 minutes, U.S. forces not only defended their ship, but unleashed a counteraction so overwhelming that 43 Iranian naval vessels were destroyed and multiple enemy bases were struck. This was not merely a skirmish at sea, it was a stark display of naval strategy, rapid decision-making, and the high stakes of power projection on the world's busiest waterways. As we unpack this story, you are about to witness how an apparent ambush became a crushing blow that reshaped a volatile standoff. Before we dive deeper into the details, make sure you subscribe to Military Power, where we uncover the hidden truths and untold stories behind the world's fiercest military confrontations. The Persian Gulf has long been a testing ground for global power, where every naval movement carries strategic meaning and every encounter risks escalation. For decades, this narrow waterway has been essential to the world's energy supply, yet it has also remained one of the most volatile zones in modern geopolitics. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy units frequently approached American ships at close range, forcing course adjustments and drawing firm warnings from U.S. commanders that such actions violated international maritime law. Tension in the region was not new, but it was steadily building. Into this fragile environment sailed the USS Tempest, a small U.S. Navy patrol ship assigned to surveillance and escort duties rather than frontline combat. By design, Tempest was not meant to project overwhelming force. However, accompanying her was a cargo vessel carrying classified U.S. intelligence equipment valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, making the mission far more sensitive than it appeared. To an outside observer, the operation looked routine. Beneath the surface, it carried strategic weight that extended well beyond the size of the ships involved. From Iran's point of view, the moment appeared ideal. A lone patrol ship operating far from larger U.S. warships, escorting a vessel marked as civilian, seemed like an opportunity to assert control and test American resolve. Historically, Iranian naval confrontations had rarely gone beyond intimidation. Aggressive maneuvers, close passes, and verbal challenges were common, but actual use of force remained rare. This encounter, however, unfolded differently. What began as harassment quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. As the afternoon heat settled over the Gulf, 8 Iranian fast attack boats closed in on USS Tempest without warning. The approach was fast, deliberate, and unmistakably hostile. Within moments, the situation crossed a critical threshold as Iranian forces attempted to board the American vessel, an act that clearly violated international norms. For a brief window, the U.S. crew appeared cornered. Outnumbered and isolated, Tempest faced a direct threat with no visible support nearby. The question that remains is simple but consequential. Why did Iran believe this encounter would end differently? What assumptions led Tehran to underestimate the scale of the response? As this story unfolds, those misjudgments will reveal how a single decision at sea can trigger consequences far beyond one ship, 1 hour, or one stretch of water. Radar screens aboard USS Tempest started to populate with fast-moving contacts, not drifting merchant traffic, but small craft accelerating hard and closing distance with intent. Within minutes, 8 Iranian fast attack boats split into separate elements, approaching from multiple directions to box the American ship in. This was not a chance encounter. It was a coordinated maneuver designed to cut across Tempest's bow, limit her ability to maneuver, and apply pressure from all sides at once. As the gap narrowed, Iranian crews transmitted messages claiming the waters were under their control and demanding the U.S. ship stop for inspection. Such assertions had surfaced before in the region, but rarely with this level of physical aggression. According to reporting by Reuters and the Associated Press, Iranian naval units have a long history of asserting contested claims in the Gulf through intimidation rather than legal channels, often stopping just short of direct confrontation. This time, however, the behavior crossed a visible threshold. The boats did not slow. They continued to close. On the bridge of USS Tempest, the response followed established international rules. The ship maintained course and speed, broadcasting clear warnings that it was operating in international waters and would not submit to unlawful boarding. There was no sudden turn toward combat, no reckless escalation, but also no retreat. The message was firm and deliberate. The United States would not yield simply because it was outnumbered. This balance, calm but unyielding, has long been a defining feature of U.S. naval operations in the region, designed to prevent miscalculation while protecting freedom of navigation. The Iranian boats kept coming. The distance shrank rapidly, close enough that individual figures could be seen on deck, weapons slung and ready. At this range, there was no ambiguity about intent. Cameras later reviewed by analysts showed Iranian crews moving with purpose, not posturing for show, but preparing for physical contact. As documented by U.S. Central Command briefings, the proximity was well inside what naval officers consider safe operating distance, turning every second into a potential trigger point. Moments later, a more troubling sign appeared. Boarding hooks and climbing equipment were brought into position. This was no longer harassment. It was preparation for seizure. In maritime law, attempting to board a foreign military vessel without consent is considered a severe provocation, one that risks immediate armed response. For the crew of Tempest, the situation now carried real consequences. Outnumbered and surrounded, they faced the possibility of close-quarters confrontation on a narrow deck, where seconds and decisions matter more than numbers. From the Iranian side, the calculation seemed straightforward. A small patrol ship, operating far from major combatants, might hesitate under pressure. Past encounters had conditioned Tehran to expect warnings, protests, and eventually disengagement. Yet what those fast attack crews could not see was the broader picture. USS Tempest was not an isolated piece on the board. She was a node within a larger network, linked by sensors, communications, and standing response plans designed precisely for moments like this. As the Iranian boats edged closer and the risk of boarding became imminent, the captain of Tempest made a decision that would alter the course of the entire encounter. A distress signal was transmitted, concise and urgent, signaling unlawful hostile action in progress. In naval terms, it was the moment the incident crossed from tense standoff into active threat. That single transmission changed everything. What had looked like a localized confrontation instantly expanded into a regional response. Forces already positioned in the area began to move, air assets were alerted, and commanders higher up the chain were notified in real time. The chessboard widened, and the Iranian boats, still focused on the deck of a single ship, were suddenly no longer facing just USS Tempest. The dangerous approach had achieved its opposite effect. Instead of forcing submission, it had triggered a cascade. From that moment forward, the encounter was no longer defined by who was closest or who had more boats, but by how quickly overwhelming power could be brought to bear. And as the next minutes would prove, the consequences of that miscalculation would unfold far faster than anyone on the Iranian side appeared to expect. The moment the distress signal left USS Tempest, the balance of the encounter shifted in a way the Iranian crews never anticipated. What looked, from the surface, like a lone patrol ship under pressure was in fact a trigger point inside a much wider U.S. response system that had been quietly positioned across the Persian Gulf for years. According to reporting by Reuters and the Associated Press, U.S. naval forces operating in the region are structured to respond within minutes to any unlawful attempt to seize or endanger American vessels, especially in international waters. This was not improvisation. It was doctrine coming alive. As Tempest's emergency call was received, 2 U.S. destroyers operating nearby altered course almost immediately. Their movement did not require lengthy authorization or debate. In the Gulf, reaction time is treated as a weapon in itself. At the same time, helicopters already assigned to regional patrols were ordered into the air. Within minutes, the soundscape of the encounter began to change. What had been the whine of fast attack boats cutting across the water was joined by the deeper thrum of rotors approaching from above. This escalation was not accidental. It was designed to be seen, heard, and understood. What Iran had not accounted for lay even closer than those incoming assets. The cargo ship escorting Tempest, marked and moving like a civilian vessel, was not defenseless. Investigations later referenced by U.S. officials and reported by major news outlets confirmed that a U.S. Special Operations Detachment was already on board, placed there precisely because of the sensitive nature of the cargo. These were not sailors focused on navigation and logistics, but personnel trained for sudden, close-range combat. The moment Iranian boats edged toward the deck, the equation changed completely. From the perspective of the approaching Iranian crews, the target they believed was lightly protected had suddenly become something far more dangerous. As they prepared to come alongside, they were no longer facing a routine ship's watch. They were confronting a layered defense that combined trained personnel on deck, air power overhead, and surface combatants racing in from beyond the horizon. According to U.S. Central Command summaries cited by the Associated Press, this integration of assets is intentional, meant to ensure that no single American ship operates in isolation, even when it appears alone. Despite these signals, the Iranian boats continued their approach. Final warnings were issued, clear and direct, stating that any attempt to board would be met with force. Those warnings went unanswered. In naval encounters, this is the point of no return. When explicit instructions to disengage are ignored, commanders are left with seconds to act. Close quarters confrontation was no longer a theoretical risk. It was imminent. This is where the fatal miscalculation becomes clear. Iranian planners appeared to treat the situation as a localized gamble, assuming that pressure applied at the point of contact could be managed without triggering a broader response. Past encounters may have reinforced that belief. However, this time, the assumptions were wrong. The United States did not view the incident as harassment. It viewed it as an attempted seizure of a military vessel in international waters, an act with serious legal and strategic consequences. Reuters later noted that U.S. officials described the response as necessary to prevent a precedent that could endanger global shipping and military operations in the Gulf. In that context, restraint had limits. The system had been tested, and it responded exactly as designed. What Iran believed was a moment to assert control became instead the moment it lost it. As the gap closed and disengagement options narrowed, the question was no longer whether the situation could be contained, but whether Iran could pull back before crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. With U.S. forces converging and the encounter already escalating, the opportunity to step away was shrinking by the second. The critical mistake had already been made. What followed would determine not just the outcome of this encounter, but the message sent across the entire region. And that leaves one unavoidable question hanging over the unfolding events. Could Iran still retreat in time, or had it already gone too far to turn back? The sound arrived before the message did. As the Iranian fast boats continued to press in, the low, heavy thrum of U.S. military helicopters rolled across the water, cutting through the sharp whine of engines and the crackle of radios. Moments later, dark shapes appeared overhead, circling with purpose. From above, clear warnings were transmitted, ordering the Iranian boats to disengage and leave the area immediately. According to reporting by Reuters and the Associated Press, this airborne show of force was a standard escalation step used by the United States Navy to halt unsafe and unlawful actions at sea before violence erupts. This was the final off-ramp. For several tense seconds, it looked as if the message might land. The Iranian boats wavered, their tight formation loosening slightly as the helicopters held position overhead. Yet the hesitation did not last. In a move that would later define the entire encounter, one Iranian craft broke from the pack and opened fire. The shots were brief, but unmistakable. In that instant, the confrontation crossed from brinkmanship into open conflict. What had been a dangerous standoff became something irreversible. From that moment on, control of the situation shifted completely. The U.S. response was immediate and decisive, not because of anger or panic, but because protocols left no room for delay. Reuters later reported that U.S. commanders viewed the gunfire as a direct threat to American lives and vessels in international waters, requiring instant action to neutralize the danger. The helicopters above adjusted position, and surface units already moving at high speed closed the distance. The initiative was no longer contested. It belonged entirely to the United States. The counteraction unfolded with remarkable speed. Precision strikes were directed not at symbols or warnings, but at the fast attack boats themselves. Each move was calculated to remove the threat as quickly as possible, while preventing the engagement from spreading further. Observers later noted how rapidly the engagement concluded once force was authorized. Within minutes, the Iranian boats that had moments earlier been advancing aggressively were disabled or destroyed, scattered across the water in smoking fragments. According to U.S. defense officials cited by the Associated Press, the intent was clear: end the threat before it could escalate into a broader clash involving commercial shipping or neighboring forces. For those watching from a distance, the transformation was stark. A situation that had appeared chaotic suddenly became controlled, almost clinical. The helicopters remained overhead, ensuring no secondary attack emerged, while U.S. ships secured the area. The surface of the Gulf, which minutes earlier had been crowded with hostile craft, fell eerily quiet. The Iranian formation no longer existed as a fighting force. It had been neutralized in a matter of minutes. Yet this rapid outcome did not mean the crisis had passed. On the contrary, it marked the point of no return. By firing first, Iran had forced the United States to respond in a way that could not be undone or explained away as another close encounter. Analysts quoted by Reuters emphasized that once weapons are used against U.S. forces in international waters, the response must be strong enough to deter repetition. Anything less risks inviting future attacks. For American commanders, the engagement was never just about defending one ship or one convoy. It was about preserving freedom of navigation and signaling that attempts to seize or threaten U.S. vessels would carry immediate consequences. The fast, overwhelming neutralization of the Iranian boats served that purpose clearly. It showed that escalation would not unfold slowly or unpredictably. It would be short, sharp, and one-sided. And yet, even as the last Iranian boat was disabled and the immediate threat eliminated, U.S. decision-makers were already looking beyond the surface of the Gulf. This clash was not an isolated event. It was part of a pattern, and patterns demand answers. For Washington, stopping the boats was only the first step. The deeper question was how to prevent the next attempt before it ever reached the water. That realization set the stage for what came next. For the United States, the destruction of the Iranian fast attack boats was not the conclusion of the operation. It was the opening move in a much larger response, one aimed not just at the symptoms of aggression, but at its source. What happened on the surface of the Persian Gulf did not stay there for long. Once the Iranian fast attack boats were destroyed and the immediate danger to USS Tempest was removed, attention in Washington shifted quickly from tactical success to strategic meaning. According to reporting by Reuters and statements later echoed by U.S. defense officials, the Pentagon no longer viewed the incident as another episode of harassment at sea. The moment Iranian forces fired on U.S. aircraft and attempted to board an American vessel in international waters, the situation crossed a clear threshold. In military terms, it was no longer noise. It was a test. Inside the Pentagon, the assessment was blunt. Allowing the incident to end with the destruction of a few boats would risk sending the wrong message, especially in a region where repeated provocations had become routine. U.S. officials told the Associated Press that failing to respond beyond the immediate clash could encourage future attempts, not only by Iran, but by other actors watching closely. The conclusion was that deterrence had to be restored, not through statements or warnings, but through action that directly reduced Iran's ability to repeat the same behavior. The decision that followed was deliberate and limited, but unmistakably firm. Rather than striking symbolic targets or escalating into a broader conflict, U.S. commanders focused on Iran's naval capability itself. Precision strikes were authorized against key naval facilities, command nodes, and support infrastructure tied to the forces involved in the encounter. Reuters later reported that these strikes were designed to degrade Iran's capacity to deploy fast attack craft quickly and to disrupt command and control systems that enabled coordinated harassment operations in the Gulf. Within a remarkably short window, the scale of damage became clear. Multiple Iranian vessels that had not been part of the initial clash were destroyed at their moorings. Support facilities used to refuel, arm, and deploy fast boats were rendered unusable. Command centers responsible for coordinating maritime operations went dark. U.S. defense officials emphasized that the strikes were highly targeted, avoiding civilian areas and focusing strictly on military assets. In less than an hour, Iran's ability to respond in the immediate area was severely reduced. What mattered just as much as the physical damage was the message behind it. This was not a speech, a warning letter, or a diplomatic protest. It was a demonstration of reach and resolve. Analysts quoted by the Associated Press noted that the United States was signaling two things at once. First, that attacks on U.S. forces would bring consequences beyond the immediate battlefield. Second, that those consequences would be shaped to prevent repetition rather than to provoke open war. This distinction is critical. The strikes were not the opening salvo of a full-scale conflict. There were no ground invasions, no sustained bombing campaigns, and no attempt to dismantle Iran's military as a whole. Instead, the response followed a familiar U.S. pattern seen in earlier confrontations. Apply enough force to impose costs, draw a clear red line, and then pause. The goal was not regime change or total defeat. It was control of escalation. Reuters reported that U.S. officials privately described the operation as a way to reset the rules of engagement in the Gulf. By hitting the infrastructure that made harassment possible, Washington aimed to make future attempts riskier and more expensive for Tehran. In effect, the United States was saying that freedom of navigation was non-negotiable and that violations would not be treated as isolated incidents. Yet deterrence is never one-sided. Every message sent is also interpreted. While the Pentagon viewed the strikes as stabilizing, Iranian leaders faced a choice. They could absorb the blow and step back, or they could frame the attack as justification for further escalation. History in the region offers examples of both paths. That uncertainty is what keeps this episode from being neatly closed. The immediate threat was neutralized, and Iran's regional naval capability took a serious hit. However, the broader tension that produced the clash remains unresolved. The Gulf is still crowded, the stakes are still high, and miscalculation is always one decision away. Which leaves the final question hanging over the aftermath of this strategic response. Will Iran treat the U.S. action as a final warning and recalibrate its behavior, or will it see it as a provocation that demands a reply? The answer to that question will shape not just the next encounter, but the future balance of power across one of the world's most dangerous waterways. In just 52 minutes, the balance of power on the surface of the Persian Gulf shifted in a way few had expected. What began as a risky boarding attempt ended with 43 Iranian vessels destroyed, multiple naval facilities disabled, and the U.S. ship and its sensitive cargo continuing their journey untouched. According to reporting by Reuters and the Associated Press, U.S. officials described the operation as a rapid, controlled response to an act that had crossed a clear, red line in international waters. The speed and scale of the outcome left little room for doubt about who controlled the situation once escalation began. This episode revealed an uncomfortable truth about modern conflict at sea. Power today is not measured only by the number of ships or weapons in one place, but by how quickly a force can read a threat, connect its assets, and respond before events spiral out of control. Iran entered the encounter believing momentum and proximity would be enough. The United States responded by showing that preparation and coordination matter more than numbers in the moment that counts. Yet this story does not end with silence over the water. The Persian Gulf has never been calm for long, and tensions beneath the surface remain unresolved. What happened at 1:47 p.m. may deter the next move, or it may reshape how the next confrontation begins. Do you think fast and overwhelming responses like this help stabilize dangerous regions, or do they simply push tensions deeper, waiting to surface again? If you want to keep exploring the hidden mechanics behind moments that change the balance of power, subscribe to Military Power. We break down the events, the decisions, and the consequences that shape our world.